Hello and welcome to today's webinar on how to run a Microsoft 365 Teams virtual conference. My name is Peter Carson. I'm going to be your presenter today. A little background, if you haven't attended one of my webinars before, I'm the president of Extranet User Manager, the sponsor of today's webinar, as well as an Office Apps and Services Microsoft MVP. Contact details are here. We're going to be sharing the recording as well as the presentation deck, so you'll be able to pull both of those down through here. We do have the Q&A section open in the Teams live event that we're using here, so feel free to ask questions in there. There is a little bit of a lag as we're doing a live presentation, about 20 seconds from when I'm talking to when you actually hear it. So we'll do our best to respond to those as we're going through. We've got a couple folks on the line here that are going to moderate for us and answer the questions, and I'll try and pause as we go through and just have a look and see if there's anything that we should address as part of that. All right. So a quick agenda of what we're going to cover off over the next 45 to an hour. We'll see how our timing goes on this. This is actually a new topic for me. We're going to start just background on Microsoft Teams, meetings, live events, and channels. Kind of level set everybody. I'm sure people are familiar with COVID, working remotely and such. You know, this is kind of the new normal of online meetings and webcams and such. May not have had the same experience doing your own live events, which is what we're doing here today. So we're going to take you behind the scenes and a bit of what you do in terms of that perspective. Some things that you're going to want to set up in your tenant from a privacy and a Teams policies point of view. So we'll cover over what you should be addressing from that perspective. Some different thoughts on registration, things like Sessionize that we've used for a number of conferences in terms of call for speakers and organizing the calendar and such, the website, the recordings, how you make that available to attendees and such. And then always of interest to the conference organizers, analytics, and what you can pull back from a data point of view. All right, so let's dive right in. And I want to start just with a little background. So I've actually been involved with a number of larger conferences as well as the webinars that we've been doing and kind of sharing from that experience. My first real big one was Comsverse. Mark Vail in the UK put that one together July 6th to 9th. It was quite an ambitious undertaking. He had a series of Teams live events running on a sort of round the clock schedule because he was targeting 3 different time zones, UK sort of Western Europe time, and then Pacific time in North America, and then Asia. So it was pretty tough for him. I mean, he was basically organizing it with the help of a bunch of other couple of folks, and I don't know how much sleep he got over the 4 days through there, but kudos to him. He pulled off a great event, a lot of lessons learned, challenge. He actually wrote a very detailed 10 article blog series on how to run a live event, and learned a lot from what he shared through that, as well as through conversations he and I have had. So great resource there. Teams Day Online, Russ Becerro down in Philadelphia area put that together, and that was the second one. He actually did one back in April, I think it was, or June timeframe. But this was a 2-day event focused mainly on North America time zone, although we did start fairly early to give European audiences a chance to participate in that as well. About 90 speakers and sessions through that, so a pretty significant event. Of course, there's Microsoft Ignite. This is the big Microsoft annual tech conference, September 21st to 24th. It was interesting because they kind of hustled it together at the last minute. You know, it was nothing coming from them for the longest time, and then literally about 2 or 3 weeks before Ignite happened, they finally announced all the sessions and topics and who was speaking and such. So it was kind of a mad rush to the finish line there. Of course, they've got the resources to put behind to pull together a massive online event. Did a good job there. I got to participate as a part of the Ask the Experts sort of breakout after one of the sessions, so that was an interesting experience. And then we're actually running a Toronto SharePoint Users Group Bootcamp we're going to use as part of our topic for today's talk. That's happening November 27th. So that's something that we've done in the past at the Microsoft offices in Meadowvale here just outside of Toronto. And yeah, of course, this year we're doing it as a virtual boot camp and using Teams as part of that, and actually Teams development as well as Teams delivery is part of that as well. So there's some unique challenges there where you're trying to present in Teams and actually have people to be able to develop bots and add-ins for Teams as part of that as well. So I'll talk more about how we're going to structure that one. So that's sort of the history there. I mean, if we go deeper into the Teams Day Online, we actually published up a case study on our website. So if you're interested, have a look at that as to how we organize that. Now, we did have some challenges there, particularly around things like Microsoft licensing and user privacy. The big challenge, and we'll get more into it, is that not so much in a live event like this one here, as attendees, you don't see the other attendees, you can't see their information. But if this was just a regular Teams meeting, you would see all of the attendees, and depending on certain details we haven't entirely figured out as to how do you make that private, to say, hey, if this is a public event, you probably don't want everybody to see everybody else's email addresses. So what we did in Teams Day Online is we said, well, let's set up a second tenant. So when people register as conference attendees, we're actually going to give them an @teamsdayonline.com address in Azure Active Directory that we set up for the conference, and then we're going to make those guests in the conference Azure AD. We're actually running the teams, and it probably sounds a little confusing, and the reality it was pretty confusing, and we caused a lot of grief to people trying to figure out how they sign their Teams client in and what this teamsdayonline.com account is and such. We've kind of abandoned this going forward. We're putting together another Teams Day Online event in November, and basically said, look, we're just going to let people register, and if they're just joining the live events, there's no privacy issues. For that November one, it is strictly just a live event, so it's pretty simple. But when we get into a bigger event, just make people aware that, look, if you're going to be joining the teams themselves and participating in channel conversations, your contact details are probably going to be shared as part of that. So be aware of that. Either you're comfortable with it and you're not worried about it, or you need to actually create a separate account yourself from a privacy point of view. So we're kind of pushing it back on the attendees, because we caused too much confusion, and there was a lot of grief for attendees trying to do this more sophisticated approach. So we've stepped away from that. So lessons learned. I mean, we were late to the game as well. We only started working with Ross about 4 weeks before the event and building out the whole registration process. So we actually started with Eventbrite for the registration and then switched it over to the website literally a week before the event. So that caused a lot of mass confusion as well. So lessons learned. Get that in place well in advance. Russ and I are already talking about the next Teams Day Online event, which won't happen until probably spring of 2021. So it's a fair ways out. We're starting to build that out now to make sure that we're well set and organized for that. And this idea I mentioned of creating the tenant account sounded great from a privacy point of view. The cost was just too high. The confusion it caused was too high from that point of view. And then just recognizing that if the online event that you're planning on doing is a free event, organizing that is a tough job. I mean, people are not being paid. Everybody's presenting as a volunteer thing. You've got 90 different speakers there. We've got moderators. We've got producers. We had some no-shows on moderators, which were challenges. Getting people to read the prerequisites were a challenge in there. And sorry, I just lost my team screen here. Logan, can you confirm that I'm actually coming through still?
Yes, you're still coming through.
Oh, that's bizarre, because I have a completely black team screen. Oh, the joys of tech here. Yeah, so some challenges getting people through that process. Oh, there it just came back. Okay. Actually, you know what? I'm going to turn my webcam off here, because we probably don't need it at this point, and that'll give people a chance to see the full screen a little easier there. So let me send that live through. All right. So I mean that getting everyone to read or watch the prereqs, I mean that applies to both the presenters and to the attendees. I mean the presenters that had technical challenges, 100% of those people hadn't shown up to the tech chats and assumed they could just join and present at the last minute, and that's not always the case. So trying to get ahead of that, while best intentions are there, it is a challenge that you want to just recognize as part of that. Okay, so before we get into the meetings, live events, channels side of things, I actually have a poll that I want to put out to people. So let me flip over to my browser here. I've got a Microsoft Forms. So I'm actually just going to share this link out. Whoops. Apparently my authentication is kicking in. It's not a bad thing to keep things secure, but I was kind of expecting to not have that show up during the session. Okay, so let me do the share here. Copy copy this out, and I'm just going to do an announcement in the Q&A. So everybody should see that now published up in the live event Q&A. So if you don't mind, I'm not going to wait for results right now, but kind of multitask a bit. I'm sure everybody's used to doing that during meetings these days in COVID now. And it's a very simple 2-question. Basically what I'm curious about is, when you go to join a online Teams event like the one that we're doing here right now, how are you most comfortable doing that? Did you come in, say, through an incognito window and join as an anonymous user, which honestly doesn't matter that much in a Teams live event, but it does matter more so in a Teams meeting? Or did you use your signed in Teams client? And if you did use your Teams client, you may not have been aware that, depending on what type of meeting you were joining, there's potential privacy issues there. Would you only do that if you knew for sure that the other attendees couldn't see your email address? How important is that to you? There's actually a preview feature from Microsoft around hiding guests' profile details from other guests, and we've tried lighting it up. We haven't gotten it to work. We've actually been working with Microsoft support to try and understand, are we just misunderstanding how that feature is supposed to work, or is something not working properly for us? Because I would like to get that addressed and say, hey, let's just take that one off of the table, because that's been a challenge for us here. And then the other piece is for future webinars that we do, what we've done currently for this one and the previous webinars, we've actually just published the join live event meeting link right up on our website there. So when you came back in to join today, you hit that link and then you go. We don't actually know if you've come in as an anonymous user, who you are through that. So as organizers, that's not great. I mean, we want to understand who's watching the webinars. And we used to use GoToWebinar previously, and it would prompt and capture that information as part of the join. Teams Live Events doesn't do that. Couple of ways that we can do that. I mean, we can have a little form that comes up that you fill in, kind of like the way GoToWebinar works, to capture your information before you join the meeting. Another is, I mean, we do have registration on our extranetUserManager.com website. Would you be comfortable just registering on that? And then it becomes a one-click join, very easy from that point of view, because you can actually associate your 365 credentials or your social credentials with that to make that very simple. Or should we be sending out a unique join link to everybody? We did send out calendar invites to everybody. We could have embedded a particular unique link in there so that we could figure out when you click on that link who you are. Requires a little bit more work on our website, but it's not that tough to pull that together. So just curious what people think from that point of view. We'll come back to that in a minute and have a look at the responses on that. Or actually, we've got 20 in there right now. So I do want to be respectful of people's privacy. So I'm just going to flip over and make sure that we're not showing anything too detailed in there. No, we're not. Okay. So on the way people are comfortable joining an online Teams event, very pretty pie chart. It's almost 3-way split there. So 8 saying they join as an anonymous user, 8 saying, hey, I'm okay using my Teams client as long as I know other attendees can't see my email, and 13 saying, you know what, I'm comfortable with that, that's fine. And we're actually seeing live updates as we go through there. That's cool. So really, if we can address the privacy side and make sure that even in a Teams meeting, your email contact information is not being shared with other attendees, that's the majority between those 2 buckets there. And even that should mitigate the folks that are saying, yes, I would be joining as an anonymous user through there. And then for the future webinars, again, pretty evenly split, whether it's filling out a form, having a registration on there, or having a unique join link. So stay tuned. We'll let you know what path we take from that point of view. But thank you for sharing that details back. All right, so let's talk a bit more about meetings versus live events. So I'm talking, I realized I should have added a third question to that poll, which was how many folks on the line today here have actually run a live event? And we're going to show you what that looks like. It is a little more complicated than running a Teams meeting, but there's definitely some advantages to that. But let's just compare and contrast between those 2 things. So if we look at a Teams meeting, I mean, we're not over 300 people on this webinar here. We've got 36 people in as attendees, so we could have run this as a Teams meeting. And the advantage there is it is very much a live connection. So right now when I'm talking, you're hearing it maybe 10 or 20 seconds after the words come out of my mouth. That's because it's actually recording it, it's live streaming it. If you were late joining this meeting, you'd actually be able to dial back almost like a PVR and go back in time and be 14 minutes back to the start and start it playing from there, or jump to the live. So there's a lot of flexibility in there from a live event point of view. And obviously the scalability, not just 10,000 people, they've updated those limits up to January 2021, and the way COVID is going, they're probably going to extend those limits out, that they can have 20,000 people. You can actually make a request and say, hey, we want to do an event for 100,000 people. They have to approve it and put some things in place for you, but it's massively scalable from that point of view. Even the time limit, it's been extended to 24 hours. Support can extend that as well. There is a limit on how many concurrent live events you're running. So as you get into a bigger conference, like Teams Day Online, we actually had 9 concurrent tracks at times running. So it's not like we were hitting the 15 limit, but we're more than halfway there. So something to be aware of if you're running a really big online conference from that point of view. There are dedicated producer and presenter roles. Right now, I'm playing the producer role rather than the presenter role. I like that because it gives me a little more control. I get to drive what I'm sharing and such. If it's a multi-presenter event, like if you've got, say 4 different people involved in it, like the Teams Day Online event I'm going to be doing with Russ and a couple of Microsoft folks in November, there's going to be 4 of us presenting through that one event. We're going to want a dedicated producer for that flips our webcams and flips our sharing sessions and such for us as part of that. But if you're the single presenter, I kind of prefer being the producer myself. I mean, the only thing I can't do as a producer that I can do as a presenter is I can't change my background as part of that. So I'm not sharing my webcam now, but I have a messy desk behind me that I honestly didn't clean up before this, and everybody gets to see that because I'm a producer. So be it from that point of view. There's a little difference in the interactions as well. On a Teams meeting, you can have an open chat, so everybody can chat with everybody. In fact, anybody can take themselves off of mute if you've allowed it. You can lock that down in your policies if you want. Anyone can present, share their webcam, and it's very live from that point of view. Whereas Q&A, that's coming through a moderation. So I see we have a new question from here. Actually, a question from Anonymous. Seems like we may be complicating this process regarding privacy. If I went to a conference, everyone would see me there, and I would agree to share my contact info for networking. I mean, that's actually kind of in line with what I'm thinking. If I'm joining a conference, I don't care about sharing my attendee information. I think of it in the way that when I was going to a physical conference before, I had a lanyard around my neck and it had my name and my company on there for everybody to see. So it was public from that point of view, but it didn't share my contact information. I mean, people couldn't take pictures of my badge and start spam emailing me. And when you get into a bigger conference, you have to worry about things like that. So that's really the only piece from that point of view. But yeah, it's a balance there. Do you want to complicate that or not? For the SharePoint user group bootcamp that we're doing, we said forget it. It's a community organization. You're actually going to be joining the event through a developer tenant anyways. We're not going to worry too much about it from that point of view. So actually, I'm going to publish that one out so everybody can see it. I kind of did a verbal reply on that one there, but you're absolutely right from that point of view. We don't want to overcomplicate things just for that one issue. So that's really the differences between the live events and the Teams meetings, and I would see using both of those in one session potentially as well. I mean, in Ignite, when I did the Ask the Expert after the sort of as a breakout after the big event, that was still a live event itself, and we used the Q&A, and we actually had several dozen Microsoft MVPs like myself on there. So it was kind of fast and furious. People were responding to different Q&As. We're getting lots of questions coming in as part of that. But if it was a smaller thing, I would actually prefer to do that breakout as a Teams meeting. And that's what we did in Teams Day Online. We did the actual presentations as live events, and then the breakouts as Teams meetings. And we typically only had a handful of people in the Teams meetings, but then those people could go off mute and just have a normal conversation, even share their screen if they wanted to get into deeper of questions they wanted to raise and such. So that worked really well. Okay. The other piece is channels, and we're going to talk about this more in the boot camp that we're going to be running. We're actually going to set up channels as part of the boot camp, because that event is very much a hands-on, learn how to code for Microsoft 365, and you want proctors to be able to share screens and see screens of attendees. We're going to use Teams meetings for that, but we're actually going to set up channels for not just for each session that we're running, but even potentially each lab within each session that we're running. So people can go into a particular channel and say, hey, I'm stuck on this part on this lab. Can somebody help me? And the proctors can be watching the activity feed and jump into that channel, do a meet now, kind of on the fly, help that person out. So I think we'll that'll help a lot from an organization point of view. You know, you could use it from an attendee hall or a conference hall point of view. Sponsor shoutouts, there's a number of different ways you might want to get that channel conversation going from that point of view. So what do you need to do to create a Teams live event? You may not have noticed that there's a drop down on the side of your new meeting button in Teams. I'm just going to show it from screenshots here because it's a little challenging sometimes to present Teams inside of Teams. But basically, you pull that drop down if you've got the live events set up for yourself within your tenant, you have the option to create that Teams live event. So you give it a title, maybe not a location because it's going to be an online event. When is that going to be happening, and any sort of details around that. Now you don't invite people to it. You just get a link that you're going to send the attendees to it, but you're going to invite other folks to it. We've got Andrew, Logan, Amanda, Dennis on this event right now. So I've invited them in, or actually Amanda set this up as organizers or as presenters or producers. So you can decide the different roles that people play within there. And then they'll get a calendar invite with a link to them that's specific for them to be able to join that meeting. But then the attendees, you just go ahead and give them the general link for any attendee. Now, when you create the event, you have to decide what your audience is going to be. I mean, if it's a company event, you would probably pick org-wide. You may want to even further restrict that down and just have only specified people in there. But for online conferences, we're typically going to be doing a public event. There's no restrictions. It's open to anybody. You don't even require sign-in. You can join as an anonymous user through there. And then there's some details you want to set on. Most of these are set by default. The important ones that I like to see here, you have to make a decision. Do you want to make the recording available to attendees? You could turn that off. It will still do a recording. It's going to live in your tenant, and then you're going to have to say, how do we handle that afterwards? Often when you're running a big conference, there's this balance. Do you want to post-produce some of those videos to polish them because there may be some trimming at the beginning and the end you want to take out as part of that? Or do you want to make it immediately available through Teams? And there's pros and cons. You need to decide from that point of view. The attendee engagement report is important. You want to see, as people are joining, as they're leaving, what does that look like from that point of view? And the Q&A feature, I like keeping that on to say, hey, we've got a live Q&A. People can ask questions. We can have moderators, like Logan or Dennis on there that can answer questions as we're going through from that perspective. You may want to set up your own support link in here. So if you've got a specific spot that you want to point people to say, hey, I'm having problems joining the event, where do I go? Maybe you've got a chat bot on your website or some other back channel that you want to take people to provide that support. You can put that in there as part of that as well. Then you go ahead and schedule the event. Okay, so I'm going to flip to a video here for a second, and I realize I need to stop sharing because one of the things I always forget is to turn on the system audio when I share my screen in both live events and Teams meetings. So bear with me one sec here. And let me do my share again. There's a little checkbox, so you're not seeing this screen that I have on my producer view right now, but I'm including the system audio. And I'm going to push that screen up from that point of view. Because I do a voiceover on this video, we're going to want you to be able to actually hear that. So let's flip over to that. All right, so let's go through acting as both a producer and a presenter on a Teams live event. So I'm going to go ahead and join the event here. I'll do a join now. Let me turn my mic on. And you can see it's joining as a producer. So producers can play all the same roles as presenters. Actually, the only thing they can't do is hide their background from that point of view. So here, let's go ahead and maximize this view here. So this is basically our control panel as producer. We have the content that's being streamed out live, my queue of what I'm planning on streaming, and then my content sources down on the bottom here. One of the things I like as a producer is I get to see the number of attendees in here, and I see that I'm in a pre-live state right now. So let me go over to my other screen here and share some content across. So I'm going to share my entire screen. I can share an application or a screen. And here we go. So we've got my webcam at the bottom here and the content that I'm ready to share. So I click on the content area here and say, hey, I want to put that content up into the queue. It's not streamed live yet. And then I can decide, you know what, I want to have a content left view or I have a video feed. and I pull in that video feed there. Now, if I had multiple presenters in here, I can mix and match. It doesn't have to be the video feed of the person who's presenting the screen out. It can be different ones through there. I would see different webcam feeds, and I would see different content feeds through there. But when I'm happy that it's where I want it to be, I go ahead and hit send live here. Now, it's a bit of a misnomer. The event's not actually live yet. It just means that I've got it over here in the live stream event. I have to actually hit the start button to start the event. When I do that, I get this big warning. You have to pay attention to this because you can't stop and restart your live event. So if you want to do a test run, don't do it against your actual live event. Have a separate event to test out with, because as soon as you hit the continue button here, there's no turning back. You can't stop it and restart it later. So now we're starting to stream out the live content that we have here. Now there is a delay. There's about a 10 to 20 second delay before people see that live content on their side. So just be aware if you're doing, answering questions in Q&A and you're waiting for people to respond back, there's going to be a lag from that point of view. And if I change my mind on what I want to share out here, maybe I want to go back to just the screen view, don't need the webcam anymore. Go ahead and hit send live on that. And now that's feeding into the new feed from that point of view. Again, there's often little delays there, so if you're trying to be precise from a queuing point of view, just be aware of that and be careful from that perspective. A couple of the other things I want to go over through here. So we've got the Q&A section up here. Basically, the way that this works is if you turn on the Q&A, people can ask questions. They show up in the new here, and they're only visible to presenters and producers who act as moderators, and then they can promote those into the published view that everybody can see. If you see inappropriate or maybe partial submissions that you just want to clear out, you can move them over into the dismissed from there. And you can also make an announcement if you want to make that available to everybody to see if there's a common question you want to address or such. Through that, you can go ahead and do that. There is also a conversation meeting chat. This is private to the producers and presenters, so treat this kind of as a back channel that lets you talk to the other producers and presenters if you need to let them know about something without jumping into the actual live event presentation from there. And likewise, when I come over to the people here, I'm not seeing all of the attendees. I'll see the other producers and presenters that are in here only from there. So that's a quick overview of Teams live events. Thanks for joining. All right, live me back again here. There we go. So yeah, we've
Peter,
talked. Yeah.
There's a question actually in that just came up around in a Teams meeting. There's a floating presentation toolbar that appears at the top of the screen and allows you to turn on the audio to start sharing. Does live events not have that feature?
I'm not sure. I haven't seen that happening. I mean, I get the mute unmute, but I don't get an ability to turn on my audio after I've started sharing. But yeah, after we're in the actual live event, we should do a little test run and see what that looks like. Cool. Okay, so coming into the settings and policies that you want to set up in order to do this. So assuming that the folks that are coming into your conference are external to your organization, big part of this is going to be setting up the guest access policies in there. So you need to come into the general Microsoft 365 admin. If you're going to be doing any sharing of documents or files or things like that, you need to do some things in the SharePoint side of things, and you also need to go into the Teams admin as part of that as well. So if we look at the different options, so first off, we need to have the ability to add new guests to the organization. So that's sort of a given from a Microsoft 365 point of view. And from a SharePoint point of view, if we want to do any sharing into the SharePoint sites, we need that ability to invite guests in from here. You may not be doing that. It depends how you're providing resources out, whether you're going to provide them through SharePoint Online or through a public-facing website. And those are both options that you can consider from that point of view. If you are going the SharePoint path, you then need to go deeper into that to say, okay, let's go into the actual SharePoint admin center, not the Microsoft 365, and set your external sharing policies and decide how your sharing settings are going to be set up through here. I mean, I strongly encourage this guest must sign in using the same account, so they can't forward an invitation to a different account or somebody else. Everybody needs to come in as themselves through there, and then deciding what the file and folder links and other settings are through there. If you look back, our previous webinar was around external sharing in Microsoft 365. We'll go a lot deeper into these topics here, so I'm not going to spend too much time right now on that. But on the Teams side, obviously it's very important to allow guest access in Teams. When you set up a new tenant, That's turned off by default. So if you want to be able to bring the guest users in through there, you're going to need to turn that feature on. There's some meetings policies and live event policies that you're going to want to set through here. Now, you don't need to necessarily set these at the tenant level. You can actually override them at the individual meeting level. So as we get into some of the deeper ones, apologies, they're probably a little small one here. But basically, who's allowed to be presenter? Do you automatically admit people? I like to leave this as everyone, so that there's no lobby, there's no admit happening. If you've got hundreds of users coming into your team's meeting, that's going to get very annoying during the meeting itself. So even if you don't enable that at the tenant level, you want to set it so that you can override it on an individual meeting, and then you can go into the meeting settings to set it from that point of view. And then continuing into the live event policies, I don't know why, but by default the transcription for attendees is turned off. I don't see a downside to having that turned on. And again, who's allowed to join, or what's the recording policies around that? What's your support URL that is going to get presented out through there? A lot of these things, again, you can override in the individual live event, but it's nice to set it up at the organizational policy point of view if it makes sense for all of your live events. We didn't talk about third-party video distribution. I mean, you can get a lot more sophisticated than just using what I was showing you in the producer view in live events. You can actually bring in external hardware. You can use OBS or vMix or other software like that allows you to get more creative in terms of mixing different video feeds and presentation and webcam feeds together in through there beyond what you can do just with the producer tools. Okay. So we've got our Teams meeting or our live event set up. Now we want to do the actual registration. What do we do from this point of view? And this is something that doesn't come out of the box as part of the live events. They don't support that. So you got to basically roll your own. I mean, you could make it fairly simple and say, hey, let's put a Microsoft form up and just point people to that. You could do an Eventbrite page. I mean, we've done all those things. We're actually doing that for the next Teams Day Online event. What we've done for the boot camp is we've actually used our Extranet User Manager product to extend a website that we've created for the bootcamp itself. And basically when people register, they authenticate with Azure Active Directory and they actually join with their own 365 credentials. Because one of the prerequisites for the bootcamp is you have to have your own 365 tenant. There's a free developer subscription you can set up as part of that. And we kind of explain that on the site. So let's actually go over to the site itself. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fire up an incognito window. So I'm coming in as a brand new user. And you can go to this link yourself, bootcamp.tspug.com. Let me actually put that out as an announcement here if anybody wants to go check it out right now as part of things. And basically this is an Azure website that we've built. So it's a bespoke website. It's not part of 365 or SharePoint Online, and you have the ability to sign in and register through here. So if I click on that register link, the first thing we do is kind of explain some of the prerequisites, the fact that you need to join this developer program. Rob Windsor, who's one of the other MVPs that is working on this, he's actually created a great video that kind of explains how you get your developer subscription going. And before you actually go through your registration, we want you to have that. So when you come in to register, what I'm going to do is use a dummy email address first, and then I'll come back to a real one that I've registered with. So this is an email address that I've never come to this site before. So we take you into a registration process, and we're capturing your name, your country, and we're actually capturing two emails. We're capturing the one that you set up your developer tenant with, which is the main one that you're actually going to join the conference with. But we kind of assume that for most people that developer tenant has got a mailbox associated with it, but they're not really actively watching it. So let's capture another email address, which is the one you want to get conference information through as part of that. So I can go through that registration process, and what it's going to do is add me as a guest user into the tenant. We haven't baked the full Logic App process yet. I'll show you a bit more behind the scenes later on that side that would actually join you into that TSpug tenant and get you set for the conference. But if I go back a step here and I say, hey, let's actually use my P. Carson at Envision IT regular Office 365 account. And now you see it's taking me over to login to microsoftonline.com. So it's actually going through the 365 authentication. and I'm using my organizational credentials, so I haven't created an account with Tspug. This is all happening through Azure AD B2B, and now I'm signed in as that user through there. So that will give me access not just to private parts of this website, but ultimately over to the team itself. In fact, let me flip to a different browser session here. Let me show you a bit of what we started to build out. We're still in the organizer phases of this. We've kind of decided what we want to do. We just haven't actually implemented it yet, but we've created in the Toronto SharePoint user group team tenant itself, we've created a bootcamp 2020 team for the event that we're going to be running. And we have a general channel there that we're going to be used for general communications. We actually have a private channel that all the organizers belong to, so that we can chat back and forth privately, work on session details and organizational details private to us. And the goal is, Hugo's actually leading the charge on this. He's another MVP. We're going to create those channels that I was talking about that pertain to the various different agendas and sessions that we have in there. And that'll be the place that people come to join the main meetings for those sessions, as well as the breakout sessions. Teams has a concept of breakout meetings that's in the roadmap. It's imminently coming out, but I don't think it's we're not counting on it making it for this event here. So we're actually going to set up separate channels and meetings for those breakouts from that point of view. So it's an interesting way to run a conference. In this case, like I said, this is very much a community group. Everybody that's joining these teams, they're comfortable sharing their privacy from that point of view. In fact, they're really just sharing those developer tenant emails for the tenants that they've created for themselves. So there's nothing from a privacy point of view to be worried about there. So that's how we've done it there. And that's a much simpler process than what we did on the previous Teams Day Online perspective. So you can actually try that out yourself, even if you're not planning on joining the event. Go ahead and go through that registration process if you're curious. Let us know how that works for you, and go from there. It is still a work in progress. Like I mentioned, we're getting some of the agenda details up there, but that should get resolved over the next week or so. All right, so as we move to a bigger event like Teams Day Online, where we had 90 different sessions, there's a lot of work just getting those sessions submitted and vetted and organized from that point of view. So we use a third-party tool called Sessionize for that. It's a great tool. It is a commercial service, and it basically allows you to build that structure out. So if I come over here to this tab, this is actually Teams Day Online 2 was the event that happened the end of September, beginning of October. I wasn't involved in the organizing part of it. We didn't get involved till just before the event from the onboarding side. Russ did the main coordinating of the event itself. So he had 182 sessions submitted by 98 different speakers when he did the call for speakers. So he opened that up way back in April, kept it open till mid-July, and that gave him time to kind of sift through those and figure out which ones he wanted to put in. And ultimately accepted 90 of those sessions. So there was a lot of content for him to go through, and Sessionize allows you to delegate that, to get committees together, to evaluate and figure out what you want to do from there. So you can actually see through here, the details of all the speakers that have submitted in here, their pictures, their bios, what sessions they've had, which ones were nominated versus accepted, and all of those sorts of details. You can see your evaluation process that you go through on that, and they can have different buckets that they go into from there. We can see our accepted sessions that we actually built out from that, what that looks like, and ultimately coming to a schedule builder to say, how do we lay that out across multiple tracks across 2 days of the event. Now this one, honestly, Russ got a little frustrated with, because the schedule builder here doesn't really work well when you get massive amounts of tracks and lots of topics. Like, I don't know what's happening in this 20-minute session here, and I would have loved if the tooltip at least told me that, but I have to open each one up to see its details from there. He ended up dumping into an Excel, managing it there, and then doing the updates back in Sessionize from there. We didn't have the website together when he was doing that process. I mean, if we go to Teams Day Online itself now, you can actually come into the site. We've set it up for the November event right now, but you can go into the past events here, and you can see the actual schedule here. And it's actually a little easier to see in this view because we can see all the details of the event. In hindsight, if we had this running when he was trying to build the schedule, this might have been an easier way to sort of visualize it and then go back to Sessionize and tweak things and come back here and check from there. Because this is actually a live feed from Sessionize. We're not building this page ourselves. We're calling out to APIs that Sessionize provide in order to create that, which is pretty cool. So if I come out of the schedule builder here and I come over to the API section, there's sort of a quick and dirty way that you can do. So if I come into the web embeds here and I say get code, if I want to see that that smart schedule, I can just show in preview here and actually see that view right through there. And you can actually take this one line of JavaScript, embed it in your web page, and boom, you get that fully functional schedule from there. So it's really easy from a developer to do that. Now you'll notice, these don't have join links and things like that because Sessionize doesn't know about Teams and how we're integrating it from that point of view. So we actually did something a little bit different. If I go back to the API embed, you can actually get API endpoints, and basically this gives you JSON data for that. So if I want to see the schedule data, it looks a little ugly because this is intended to be machine readable. We actually use this feed here, and then we can build this up, and then we can add our own controls like this view control that takes us to the recordings and such as part of that. So you don't have to throw it all away. You can use a lot of what Sessionize gives you, and then with a little bit of web stack development, you can extend that and build out your own custom as part of that. So people can come in here, hit the view link. I've already signed into the site, but basically you need to register and sign in to be able to then say, hey, I want to look at a particular recording, go through things from that point of view. I think that first talk doesn't actually have a recording on there. So let me come back to my sessions. If I grab Alexander's here, I click on that link and I can watch the recording. And we're actually live streaming that recording out from the site through there. And same thing with the presentation. I can pull the presentation content down because there's a lot of value to people. They may not have been able to join that particular event at that point in time. We were running lots of different tracks, so they can catch that content after the fact. So that's kind of the Sessionize side, the website side, the site recording pieces through there. So this just gives a little more background detail. I'm kind of taking you through all that from that point of view. So I would say if you're doing a conference that has even more than half a dozen tracks in here, I would strongly encourage you to check out Sessionize. And I think for free events, don't quote me on this, I think they have a free version of it to support community events. If it is a paid event, there is a subscription cost to it, but it's well worth the money. It really makes life easier from that point of view. The website itself, you got to decide how you're going to build that out. As I mentioned, for the current event, if I come back to the home here, we haven't baked the new B2B registration that I was showing you on the bootcamp site into Teams Day Online. That's part of our backlog that we want to work on. We didn't want to hold things up with the next event coming in just a couple of weeks. So we decided, okay, for the register link here, we're just going to point it right to an Eventbrite page and let people register through the Eventbrite page. And then we're going to give them the actual join links, similar to how we're running this event as we get close to the event. What we are planning on doing, though, is when this moves to a past event, we want to put the recordings and the decks up through there. That's when we're going to light up the B2B registration that I was describing on the SharePoint Users Group one. We're going to do that on Teams Day Online as well. So we can get people registering in, tracking them. So we've got the analytics as they're watching the recordings, pulling back the presentations from there. Because if you're in the past history here, doing what I was doing to look at those sessions and jump in and see those recordings, we're actually tracking all that activity. So when I view this resource and I click on this watch recording, we know who's signed in and which recording they're watching and when they did that, because data is really important. You want to be able to get those sorts of analytics from there. So getting the recording data itself out of Teams as you run a larger event is a bit of a challenge. There's no go download all the recordings. As a Teams admin, you can go to the reporting and analytics section of Teams and actually pull those recordings down. But you have to do them one at a time, and they all come down as recording.mp4. So you got to name them properly and connect them up so that you've got it all coordinated. Same thing with the attendee reports. I kind of wish Microsoft put one more column in the report, which was what's the event. It seems obvious you should know what event you're downloading, but when you're downloading 90 events and they're all called meeting report.xlsx, that gets confusing too. Because I'll show you in a minute, we use Power BI for analytics. We can suck those 90 Excels into Power Query and Power BI, mash up all that data across all those events and get some really interesting numbers coming out from that. But there's a little bit of manual work. Dennis, who's on the call here, had the wonderful job of downloading all the recordings and downloading all the attendee reports and naming them properly, so they connected up to the Sessionize IDs and basically wired that together. So there was some effort involved in doing that. So that brings us to the analytics topic. As I mentioned, Power BI I'm a big fan of. So we've got the details in there from that point of view. Actually, I've flipped back to my browser here, my first tab. We actually took our extranet user manager Power BI dashboard that we include with our product that shows us things like when are people registering, when are people logging in, where are they coming from around the world, that sort of stuff. And we just basically built off of that and said, let's bring that in as part of it. This chart looks a little weird because we see, sort of steady state small registrations coming through. It bumped up just before the event, and then we had this massive spike here of 2,000 registrations. It didn't get immensely popular on the day of the event. Well, it did. We had over 2,000 people in, but what happened is we loaded up all those Eventbrite registrations into the site at that point in time. So they kind of happen as a bulk import registration. We can see the logins coming in through there, and then we can come into this page here. And as I mentioned, we're capturing analytics when people click that view recording or download the presentation. We're also capturing the analytics when they hit the join live event. So even if they came in as an anonymous user, as far as Teams was concerned, we still knew who they were because they'd registered for the conference and come into the conference website for that. So we can see the actual joins to the different sessions and see which are our popular sessions and how many people are coming in through there. So lots of data from that point of view. We didn't get a chance to mash up the live event analytics. There's a little bit of work to align that with the website analytics. Definitely doable. I just ran out of cycles on that side, and we haven't circled back to do that. But as I've said before, I'm a big fan of Power BI. It lets you do some really interesting things from a data analytics. We've got a lot more detail there, but it'll start to share out attendee contact details that I don't want to do in a public venue here. But we've got all that sort of detail as well. So there we are. Actually went a little quicker than I was expecting. So we're going to give back a little time, but just to summarize and wrap up from there. Teams is a great platform. It has a lot of cool functionalities, and Microsoft is dropping new stuff all the time. Like, they are hustling. The numbers of daily active users of Teams is just continuing to skyrocket. I saw a Jeff Teeper tweet and LinkedIn post earlier this week that they were something like 130 million active daily Teams users, which has just gone through the roof from that point of view. So there's been some challenges. I mean, people have probably seen the warning saying, hey, when you create a new team, there may be a delay. When you invite somebody in or provision a new tenant, there could be delays there because the infrastructure is being stressed, absolutely. But Microsoft, for the most part, seems to be doing a good job of keeping on top of that and keeping everything humming from that point of view. One of the big challenges that I do find is that, like for the SharePoint User Group Bootcamp that we're going to be doing, we're going to be inviting people in with their organizational account so they can run their Teams client signed in as themselves and join the meeting, but they have to switch the tenant to do that. You kind of have to leave your organization and go to, in that case, the SharePoint User Group organization. So there's a little bit of challenge from that point of view. I really wish that Microsoft made it better in the Teams client to have like a single activity feed that showed me across multiple tenants and made it easier from that point of view. Because I miss a lot of messages that come through from other Teams tenants that I don't keep open all the time. And I don't think to go check them on a regular basis. There's just too many communication channels coming at me to keep on top of it from that point of view. I mean, Teams was originally designed as an organizational tool. There's a lot of rich external user stuff in there. I'm still keen to see the ability to have recorded meetings available to guest users. That doesn't exist just yet. But there's not really this idea of self-registration and guest users coming in and the automation and emails and workflows around that. We've done a lot with our Extranet User Manager product to support that. We do a lot in Logic Apps as well. We're going to be extending what's happening on the SharePoint Users Bootcamp around a Logic App workflow to send them a confirmation email and details about how they join and how that's all going to work from that point of view. Producer versus presenter. I don't know why they decided that producers shouldn't be able to change their background. I mean, normally when you get to a higher elevated role and producers are higher elevated than a presenter, they can do everything that the lower level do. So I don't know if they're going to change that. You know, it is a nice ability to be able to change your background. You may not be able to control the space that you're presenting from. You know, so it is nice to be able to either blur or swap out your background from that point of view. And the attendee privacy, I know we had the comment there that, you know, we may be overcomplicating it. We're just trying to be respectful to say, hey, if we're running a public conference, we shouldn't by default be sharing everybody's email address out with everybody else. Particularly, you know, if you're into the EU and GDPR, I mean, that gets you into really hot water from a privacy point of view. And the other thing, you know, make sure you do your planning ahead of time, set up some tech checks, you know, try your best to get your speakers, even though they may be volunteers, get them to come in. They could be seasoned, but let's make sure everything's working from that point of view. You know, going back to the lessons learned with Teams Day Online, things like not giving presenters producer roles caused some mass panics at the last minute where, you know, a moderator no-showed or a producer no-showed, and who's producing? We're running 9 tracks and we're trying to keep on top of all of it. You know, it caused some panics that if the presenters were just producers and comfortable sending themselves live through there, I think we could have mitigated a lot of that from that point of view. We've got a couple of new questions in the Q&A. Let me just come back through there. So a private note there. Thank you. I'll have a look at that. Using channels as a room rather than the upcoming breakout rooms. Yeah, I'm kind of on the same picture there. That you know, I'm not even sure if the breakout rooms were there as they've been described that we would use them. I do like the idea of using channels there. Mainly that, you know, we're not going to keep those rooms live and open in meetings. We're basically going to use the chat within the channel to say, hey, I'm here and here's my problem, and maybe it can get solved over chat, or maybe it turns into a meet now through there. I like that flexibility. So Dwayne, totally agree with you from that point of view. Joe had a question here on, as a live event producer, it'd be great to have the option to also unmute. Not just from a live event, I'd love to have that on a Teams meeting as well. I have the ability to mute everybody. I've got into situations with you know, client meetings where I've muted everybody because somebody has a noisy mic and I don't know who it is, and then trying to get somebody to unmute, and I've had to share my screen because they're not familiar with Teams, and kind of got to show them where's the button in Teams to unmute. You know, it would save a lot of confusion if you could just unmute that person for them as part of that. Also, regular meetings, it's always funny when you see people's lips moving as they're answering a question in a broader sort of general meeting. You know they're on mute and they don't, and you got to call them out for that. If you could just hit the unmute for them, probably save a lot of grief there. Another question from Dwayne on, as a producer, you can use a third-party background tool or XSplit VCams. Yeah, so absolutely, if you get into things like OBS and more sophisticated tools, you've got that control to be able to mix in your own background up above and beyond what Teams lets you do there. And you know, maybe that's another webinar, or maybe it's just another recording we should do on tools like that. I haven't used OBS myself. I've used vMix before, which is a cool tool. It basically takes your feeds and turns them into a webcam, and it doesn't matter what tool you're using, whether it's Teams or something else. It makes it very easy to kind of extend its behavior from that. OBS now has some connections directly into Teams live events. From an API point of view, so that's interesting. That's something I'd like to explore better and see what we can do on that side. Just a comment back about breakout rooms being dynamic, but honestly, I haven't gone too deep into the breakout rooms just yet. So yeah, we're gonna have to explore that a bit more. You know, maybe I'll change my mind on channels versus breakout rooms from that perspective. So thanks for that feedback. So I think that's all of our questions through there. Want to thank everybody for joining and for bringing the questions in from that point of view. That's been great. Just a quick note on some upcoming events. We actually have another webinar coming up November 10th, so a couple weeks out from now, on utilizing SharePoint Online as a headless CMS. This actually has some relevance to today's topic. You know, how do you build that conference website itself? So we're doing some cool things where we allow you as a content author to build your content in SharePoint Online, as a headless CMS, so it's pure content. It's not about the presentation, and then you can build the presentation layer in multiple different ways, whether you want to build an app for your conference as well as a website that's mobile friendly, you know, a bunch of things that you can do to be able to consume it from that point of view. And that concept of a headless CMS is something that's really been gathering momentum the last couple of years, of really separating content creation from presentation and be able to leverage that content then on multiple different presentation vehicles. And then, of course, I've mentioned already the boot camp that's happening November 27th. The one we forgot to put up here is the new Teams Day Online. I've shared the link out for that, so that's coming out November 12th as well. So with that, I want to say thank you to everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and stay tuned for future events. Thanks very much. Bye now.